We are three friends who met in college and now are working in diverse fields across the globe. Curious to know about what our friends are up to. So here we are, connecting, talking, and learning from our friends. In this podcast, we are sharing extraordinary insights from our not so ordinary friends, working in various industries and sharing their stories and their journey so far. These are your hosts, Hiloni Panatar
Atit Kothari.
And Tapan Desai.
And this is What the Hat. Subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss on any episodes. Today we have with us Archana Iyer. She is a software engineer at Microsoft working on mixed reality platforms during the day and usually found stepping out of the tech world and doing improv comedy most of the nights of the week. We are delighted to have you, Archana, on the show. Welcome to What the Hat.
Yay! Thanks for having me.
Hi, we're super excited to have you. Like, I still remember the first time I kind of met you. I think it was a good memory. I think Mansi kind of made us meet, and all of us just like took off from there. And
I honestly believe we went to college just to eat each other's food and like eat in the canteen. I don't think we really had much more motivation at that point of time. Aaj dabbe mein kya hai, aaj dabbe mein kya hai. I even remember, like, since all of us were in IT, I remember there was one day where we had like a joint dabba thing where everyone just came and kept all their food on the desks, and then everyone was eating from everyone else's dabba. Like, what, 60 of us? Do you remember this?
Yeah. Like that was end of the fourth year when we had all these days planned. That was super fun. Yeah. Even Panvel. Like I keep remembering Panvel. It was so much fun.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Atit, do you know that video is still on YouTube?
I know. It's awesome.
Okay.
I get few hits now and then.
Okay, because I like randomly, like other day I was looking for something and I typed DJ Sangmi and that was one of the first videos that showed up. And I had erased that video from my memory and I was watching it and laughing. We were idiots. Yeah, it was funny.
So, Archana, let's start from the beginning. Why engineering and why DJ?
So engineering wasn't initially the plan. I didn't know what it is that I wanted to do. I wasn't sure if I wanted to do engineering or not, but it was always something that I had in the back of my mind. And when I was in school, I used to do some amount of programming, and I remember being pretty decent at it, but I never thought that's something that I was going to keep pursuing. So honestly, I actually kind of reached engineering by the process of elimination, and I was like, I don't want this, I don't want this, I don't want this, I don't want this. Okay, this sounds like the most interesting amongst all of these options, and that's kind of how I reached on engineering. And in general, I felt like that would be the most general field I could enter, so that I could basically, I'd seen a lot of like people who would go into engineering and do different things after, so I thought it would be the most interesting to give me the option to switch afterwards while learning technical skills at the same time. So it mostly came by the power of elimination plus like what would give me the biggest skill set to then use in the future. And how DJ? My sister went to TSEC and she always had this thing that she was like, either go to TSEC or DJ, all the other schools are too nerdy, you won't have fun. So I was like, I don't want to have fun also while studying. So when I got into DJ, I think it was like I don't know. I went to the school and I got a good vibe from it. The people seemed friendly enough, and also I didn't have a great CET score, to be honest, and I was not getting into TSEC. So I was like, okay, I like this. Let's go to DJ. Let's do engineering. We'll see how it works out.
So tell us more about like your life in DJ and like what did you do outside of your regular curriculum?
Yeah, I think first you should ask me, did we do our regular curriculum? No. In all seriousness though, like we did study when it was exam time, like we all were hardcore, like padhai karna hai, marks lena hai. Like I think all of us had that attitude, at least around the exam time. But other than that, I was very involved with sports stuff. Like I used to play basketball from the first year. And I remember in the first and second year, I was a bit involved with Pulse and Paricha as well, like the festivals. I remember dabbling a little bit in like the sponsorship end and then a little bit in the creative end, and just I was kind of just like seeing what's interesting to me. And at that point, we don't really know what we're good at or not good at. So it's kind of like, oh, this seems interesting. Chalo, ye try karte hain. And then I think in like third year was when the sports festival started, and then which was Iridescence. I don't know, is it still around? Yeah.
I think they
I think they've
combined it with,
merged all of it into
yeah.
like Trinity.
Ah,
So it's
correct,
like
correct, correct.
Parachai and the sports festival together.
Right. So then after that, I mean, I got a bunch of sponsorship experience there, and then after that, I got into the sports festival a lot because like my passion truly died in basketball, and making like being allowing for that kind of environment to be built. So I remember like I was in the leadership committee for the sports festival, so that was something I was very actively involved with. And I think you guys were similar in like at that point of time, these festivals were our like everything, like that would be like, yay, festival will be the best. And, we were kind of motivating ourselves at that. And it was actually, I loved it. I think I learned a lot of my basic leadership skills over there, and gave me a lot of confidence, which I didn't know I had. Like, I didn't think that I could help run a festival at that scale and actually have so many different schools and colleges and participants. So that was awesome. Other than that, I remember in my last year, I did like an internship during the summer at IIT. I think one of my biggest regrets is not doing more internships. I wish we had like gotten this advice earlier and kind of this feedback earlier, key in the summer, keep yourselves busy with doing some internship, some project, like something to keep yourselves busy, even if it's not like a big scale thing, because that's really going to help you hone down on what is interesting to you and not interesting to you. So that's something I wish I did a little more while I was in school. But the one summer that I did the internship was super helpful. So I think it was like a bit of working on this, like playing sports, running the sports festival, doing the internship.
I think since the very beginning, you were quite keen on pursuing like further studies or doing some kind of masters. Uh, I believe even like your sister had done it, and I think that kind of also helped you kind of make that decision that okay, you might be wanting to go further into like a specific line of IT and learn more about it. So, I mean, was that the reason to like pick up masters and then masters specifically in the US?
Yeah, no, that's actually that was a great starting point for me was when my sister came to the US to do her masters at Northwestern, and I was seeing like she was really enjoying studying. Like there were extracurriculars, but like her main thing was I'm loving the content that I'm doing, and I'm really deep diving technically into things that I love. She did her masters in biotech, and I was like, I want that. I want to be interested in the coursework that I'm doing and really get a technical depth. And I think I'm good at programming. I think I enjoy it, but I don't feel like I'm giving it my all at DJ. And I really want to get that technical depth. And luckily enough, like I was privileged enough to have the opportunities to be able to come to the US because that's not something that's always available. And so I was like, yeah, this is a great place for me to shape my technical skills better. And also, I mean, a lot of us have lived at home with our parents, and I was like, I really need to learn that independence and live by myself. And this seemed like a great way to also get that experience. And obviously, it was a struggle at the start, but it's once you figure it out, it's oh man, you feel like a responsible grown up to an extent, and you're like, this is actually nice. I can take care of myself. So it was a combination of wanting to be able to take care of myself, and at the same time like really getting a technical depth in subjects that I'm interested in. So, and plus Atit was going to CMU, so I had to go to CMU. Just
Yeah, same here. I selected same here because Archana was going.
Exactly. So I was like, मैं कैसे नहीं जाऊंगी इसके साथ? So yeah. But no, see, it was really good. It was hard. It was many sleepless nights. But most of my computer skills that I've learned were in the 2 years that I spent at CMU, and I'm so grateful for it.
So, why? Any other reason other than me going to CMU? Why did you select CMU? Do you have any other colleges that you looked over before going for CMU?
Yeah, there were a few colleges that I was interested in and I had gotten into. It was really funny. I didn't get into any of my safe schools. Like I didn't get into USC and what was the other ones? I forget. I think it was I didn't get into Rutgers. There was a few. Basically, I have applied like 5 safe schools. I didn't get into any safe schools. I was like, okay, I'm not going to be doing my master's. And then I got into all my ambitious schools. I was like, what's happening here? This is so confusing. But when it came down to it, like CMU seemed like the best option for me because the program that I joined, which was in the Information Networking Institute, so it was a program where I was getting to do computer science courses plus ECE, plus we got some security plus some business management courses. So it was kind of a combination of all these. Like I got to try a bit of each one of these in depth, and I thought that was a very interesting program, and also it gave me the opportunity to do a 6-month co-op with a company, which counted for my course credits. So I was able to work with the startup for 6 months, and that experience was very helpful. So I think it was a combination of the things that this course at CMU was offering me. Also, when it comes to technical computer skills, CMU is one of the best. And Atit, I think you can attest to that as well. Just like how they make you work really hard. And like it's really hard to get into CMU, but it's even harder to get out. Like it's hard to pass the classes and actually make it through. And I think it was a great place for me to learn a lot of the skills that I use today in my job. Like I feel like most of the things that I learned there are things that I actually use at Microsoft, and that's something I really appreciated about my time there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like whatever programming and the understanding of computer science that I gained was CMU. Like
Yeah.
I don't know what I did for the first 4 years. I got a bachelor's degree in information tech, but I had no idea what it actually is and how important and how impactful it can be.
Really. I still remember, I think it was in the 4th year of engineering where there were basically students who had gone to the US and to different companies. And I think our teachers had brought them back to come and talk to us in class. Do you all remember this? And I remember them telling us that, pay attention to data structures and algorithms. You never know how, it's going to be very useful for you in the future. I was like, what are they saying? And then I came to CMU. I was like, oh, I know what they're saying. If you don't know these things, you can't do anything. I wish I had listened to my seniors when they were giving us advice. It was a grind, but I'm so glad I had that. Yeah.
Nice. I think you've always been like a person who likes group studies and kind of likes to study with people. So I think that would have been.
I think it's the accountability part of it that works for me the best. Like if someone else is like, Kitna kiya, did you do your part? I'm like, okay, I'll do it. That's what kind of helps me.
Tell us more about like your internship, which was like 6 months long at CMU.
Yeah, so it was actually, this was also, we discovered that Atit and I were in Silicon Valley at the same time, at the same CMU campus, but neither of us knew that, which is so funny because it's a really small Silicon Valley campus. So basically what the course was allowing me to do was for 6 months, 4 course credits, I was able to work with a startup. It was this startup called Omelette, which was open messaging application. So kind of like WeChat, but not in China and the US instead. And it was literally a 15-person company, and they were working out of sort of like a garage kind of situation. So that experience of working with such a small company, which literally does not know where it's going to be in 6 months, that was very eye-opening. And just like this rate at which things move in an environment like that was just amazing. And it was, it was a fun hustle. And I got course credits for it, so that was helpful. But it was really cool to see, the stereotypical Silicon Valley company working out of a garage, working nights and days and how that's like. So that's kind of what that experience was like for me.
Did you actually work out of a garage?
No, I wasn't allowed to work at the garage, but they would come to the campus and like give us work that we need to. I did go visit it, and it was pretty cool, but yeah.
So how did you get a internship there?
So that was actually
campus.
So that was more of a 6-month co-op. My internship was something I did was it after? Yeah, it was before that. So the internship I had gotten through the CMU Career Fair. No, not the CMU Career Fair. Grace Hopper Career Fair. I had gone for the Grace Hopper conference, and over there they had the usual career fair with like so many different companies, and I interviewed over there. And I did an internship at Intuit in San Diego. I was working on their TurboTax product, which was not something I knew about at all. So I don't know how I got that internship, but I fooled someone and I got it. So that was nice. Whereas the co-op, that was actually something, there was a bunch of companies that had a tie-up with CMU for this co-op course, and basically they told us that these are the positions we have, what are you interested in, because every student had to get assigned a co-op. So that was less of us finding them, more about them telling us that these are all the options you have, which project are you interested in, you kind of rank which projects you're interested in, and based on availability they assign you. There were those two different like industry experiences I got to have before I actually joined Microsoft.
So, I mean, did that shape up some reason to kind of be part of Microsoft after graduating, or there's like a whole new story to it?
Getting into Microsoft, I didn't think I would get in, first of all, because I thought my interview was terrible. I thought I bombed it really bad. But I did get an offer, and later I spoke to one of my interviewers once I joined Microsoft, and because I was really curious. I was like, how did I get in? But like when I was solving one of the questions, I literally halfway through the question, I realized I was doing it totally wrong. And I was like, okay, I'm going to start from the start again. And I like went back to the beginning and then solved it again. So I reached out to one of my interviewers once I joined, and I was like, hey, why did you want me to join your team? Because that guy was the one who extended the offer to me. And he's like, because I saw you struggling. I didn't give you too much guidance. You realized you were struggling and you were like, oh no, I need to fix this. And you actually had the presence of mind to go back to the start and solve the problem on your own again without panicking and just taking it one step at a time. And he's like, I saw that skill and that's why I wanted you on my team. I was like, whoa, I did not expect that. And it was just really nice to see that they were looking more at the problem solving as opposed to, do you know this tech and this particular algorithm, which I thought was pretty cool, because like I always had this idea that it's only about the data structures and algorithms, and it doesn't matter how much your thought process and things like that work. So when I got offered that job, I was like, the fact that that's why they want me for my problem solving, that's really cool. And also just the Microsoft has so many different teams and so many different products that if I didn't enjoy it in one product, it's not easy, but it's relatively, you have more opportunities to try something else. And there's a lot of different roles that I could try. So that's kind of what attracted me to want to go and work there.
That's an interesting story. So what was the interview process like?
It was hard. Yeah, I got the first interview on site at CMU in the career fair. That's when I did the first round interview. And after that, I cleared the first round. So they flew me over for the on-site, which was like 6 hours of back-to-back interviews, which was exhausting. I've given them so many opinions about how they should be changing this. And I know they're constantly like trying to fix the way they do university recruiting. So I did those 6 hours of interviews, and basically how it used to work at Microsoft is that there's a university recruiting day. So what they'll do is they'll have, let's say, an org such as Office, and they'll say, okay, Office needs X number of positions. We're going to fly in all of these students and they're going to interview for these roles. And as a student, you don't really get to pick which team you want to go to, which is annoying, but it is what it is. And then basically on that day, if you're interviewing that day, you're interviewing for the Office team, or you're interviewing for the Xbox team or something like that. And then based on how many headcounts they have, they offer that many positions. On site, most of my interviews, I think 2 of them were problem solving and 3 of them were data structures and algorithms. And I think there was one at the end, which was just kind of tell us more about yourself and, this about the projects you worked on and things like that. It was an intense day of interviewing, but it was a lot of fun at the end of it, not during it.
Do you have any recommendation on resources that like students who are preparing for interview should be going through?
Yeah, no, great question. I'm sure a lot of people are already using Cracking the Coding Interview and LeetCode because those are the main 2 resources. But other than that, I think the thing I found most useful was mock interviews. And I know LeetCode offers some sort of, mock interviews that you can do online, but just when you're interviewing, there's a lot of your other friends who will be interviewing as well. Just have a mock interviewing session with them, or, try finding an alumni who wants to help you out with mock interviewing, because I know a lot of alumni like helping with these things. And the mock interviewing really, really helps because you kind of put yourself in the interview mindset and, you get better with the stress the more you do it. That was something that helped me tremendously, was just mock interviews as much as I could.
Makes sense. I think mock interviews are the best. That
Yeah.
like when you're put in front of a whiteboard, it's a different type of.
It really is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, interviewing is not fun. Like, wherever you do it, whoever does it, like 4 years down the line too, it's never fun. So it's always make the most of it when you can, and then just like give your best then, and then be like, okay, I can breathe now. But the best way to get better at them is just doing more of them.
Yeah, exactly. I hate interviews. I just hate them because you
Yeah.
don't know if you're doing good or you're doing bad until you get the offer.
Yeah.
So I always felt like I'm doing really bad during the interview, but turns out they call me for the next round. So it's like and every time I thought I had a good interview, I'm never called. So it was like very weird for me that way.
Yeah, and there's so many variables that come into the picture now. Like, what is the mood of the interviewer on that day? What is your mood on that day? Like, what kind of question did they feel like asking you? Or, have they had a bad experience with someone who has the same experience as you? Then they have like a preconceived mindset about how you're going to perform, and they're just like, it's just so many variables that it's a stressful situation. So it's just kind of practice it and give it your best, and if it works out, it does. If it doesn't, like, it's not the end of the world. And I think that's really important to understand, is that your first job is not your only job, it's just your first thing. So it's okay. I failed so many interviews before I got into Microsoft. Like, there was this phase where I was like, I'm not going to get anything. This is going to be terrible. Like, what am I doing here? I'm coming home. Like, that whole thing. The more you do it, the you get better. And then it works out. And it's very interesting. Like, when you apply as a student, you're like looking out for companies and being like, please hire me, please hire me. But the minute you get like 1, 2, 3 years of work experience, like, your value increases so much so quickly. And when you reach out to companies, or even sometimes companies reach out to you, they're very interested because they're like, you already have some experience, and like, tell us more about that. And then it becomes less of there are of course the programming interviews, but there's a lot of the system design interviews, which is what you do in your day-to-day job. And you're valued, like, just getting from grad school to the first job, that I think is the hardest interviewing part, just because you have no idea what the industry is like and what they're expecting. B, like, you don't know your own worth at that point. You're like, oh, I'm just one of these, like, whatever 100 other students that I'm working with, and everyone's applying for the same jobs. Whereas once you come to the industry, you're like, okay, like, not everyone's applying at the same time, or at least you're not actively talking to them and hearing about, oh, I got this job, oh, I got that job. So it's like not that constant, interaction from all sides about that. So that first job is always stressful.
It's just that, like, when you said how tough it is to like even crack an interview, I was like, dude, like, I sit and prepare when I have like candidates coming in for roles as well, understanding what they have done and like how can I make them fit into this specific role, and like even sell that role to them, because like most of the students, when they are just out of grad school, they want to do everything, and that's what their primary requirement is. And then you need to understand, like, make them understand, okay, you first need to give some time to this, you need to like get to a level where you can decide whether it's something for you or not, and then think of switching another option. And I mean, it's tough there as well.
No, that's right. It's a good point. Like, when I remember when I was doing some interviews at DJ, I think it was Capgemini, and one of the interviewers, he's like, you're doing well, but you are interested in too many things. You should start focusing on what you want to do. And I, like, that was the first time someone had actually been real with me and was like, slow down, think about what you actually like. And that actually made me think more about it. And I'm glad I got that feedback at that point, because I was like, oh, I like this, I like that. Like, anything, just, take me, I'll do any job you want. But it was like, tell us what you're actually interested in. And I'm glad I got that feedback. And I think, like, to your point of it's hard on the other side as well, I think something we forget to do when you're interviewing for a company, like, you are also interviewing them. Like, you want to make sure that's a place you want to work at, and the people who are interviewing you seem like good people who you do want to spend time with, because you're going to be seeing them for so many hours every day. And like, it's important to understand that it's a two-way thing, even though they're in the position of power at that point. But like, you need to get that good feeling from them too. And I think that's something we don't tend to do very often. but it's good to be mindful about.
So, what's your current role at Microsoft?
I type things some days. No, I'm joking. I'm a software engineer and I work on the mixed reality team. So, specifically on the HoloLens product. And what I work on is I work on a platform. One of the things I work on is a platform to help build a collaborative and shared mixed reality experiences. So, um, the HoloLens is Microsoft's mixed reality device. And for those who don't know what mixed reality is, it's kind of midway between virtual reality, where you're in a completely, like when you wear a virtual reality headset, you're in a world which is completely different from the world that you're in. So everything is like basically in another world, as opposed to augmented reality, which is like similar to Snapchat filters, where it's you're placing objects in the real world, but you're placing like 3D objects around in the real world. And in the middle is mixed reality, where it's the real world and you're placing objects, but you're also anchoring things around those objects, so you can like interact with those things in the real world. So for example, if you know how like in Iron Man, they have all these like 3D projections that they're interacting with, building all these models and things like that. So that's the like the futuristic view of it. But what we work on is how do you enable different users wearing different devices to be able to have that shared experience across devices. Yeah, so I work on that platform and building that out for developers. So that's been pretty fun.
I was actually
Wow.
picturing Iron Man when you started explaining mixed reality. How far are we from that?
Actually, the question should be rephrased to how far are we from affordable mixed reality? Because right now we're kind of already there to an extent with the HoloLens, but it's so expensive that it's only like big companies and enterprises can afford it. It's not something that's consumer level yet. Whereas like if you see VR now has slowly made it better. I think like Atit would have more experience with this too. It's just like, the AR VR world is becoming more accessible. So the idea right now, the main focus is at enterprise level, getting to that technology which is useful, and then once you get enough headway with that, using that technology to make it more consumer level and so that more people can use it. And something that my team works on is like realizing that not everyone can have a HoloLens device. So how can you make it such that people with an Android or an iOS device can also have the same mixed reality experience without necessarily having a HoloLens device? And because it's expensive, like I'm not paying $3,500 for that device at home. That's very expensive. I think the tech is almost there, but I just think the world is not ready for it and it's too expensive. And I think it's going to be more of like society is not ready for it yet. It's a lot of a mindset change to be able to adapt to this technology. And I think that's where the interesting part is going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they were targeting Microsoft initially were targeting like customers who, and they thought they would bring down the price, but then like this was 2016, and still they were not able to figure out like by 2019. So I think they moved to B2B business, right? Like
Yep.
only enterprise would be able to get them.
Yeah. They kind of switched the focus to say that first, let's figure out the product, let's figure out the tech. And once we know that we're there, let's see how we can bring it to everyone.
Experience it to actually understand how powerful it can be. Like, does it matter how many videos you see or how much we explain or articles you read? You just have to explain.
No, it's like honestly, like not even exaggerating. The first time I put on the device, I was like, is this real? Like what I have a lot of these moments where I'm like, am I actually working on this? How did I manage to land this? This is going to be so useful. And recently I saw this video about how during the COVID times, because it's a great thing to actually be using right now when you want to do remote things and want to be able to see people and see experiences without physically being there. So there was this video of how they shipped a bunch of HoloLens devices to some students, and this was medical students who were learning the anatomy. And because they couldn't physically be in the school and like interact with the human cadaver, they had like a projection of the human body, and they were able to like pick out parts of it, and the teacher was able to teach them that like what you're looking at right now, look at it from all the angles, like open up this thing, this is that artery, and like just the utility of that, even though it's very nascent right now, was just mind-blowing. Yeah, it's going to be very, very useful. I'm very excited for where it's I think it's still like 3, 5, 7 years down the line that it's actually going to be something that's adapted. But once it gets there, I think it's going to be super helpful. Like I had this very interesting experience 3 weeks back, actually. I've been wanting to do like a conference tech talk for a while. And I was supposed to do one, but COVID happened, so it wasn't going to happen. But Microsoft actually moved this whole conference into Altspace VR, which is like a VR social network. So I was able to give a talk to 300 people with their like avatars physically present in the room, and they were able to like see me talking and like interacting with my presentation, and then they were able to ask me questions afterwards, and it was all in the virtual world. So I was able to like meet new people and have conversations with them without physically being there while they could still see me. That was a really fun experience, and it kind of gave me that realization of this is going to be useful eventually. It was nice.
Yeah, that's awesome. What was the talk about?
It was about the shared collaborative experiences, and Azure Spatial Anchors is the product that specifically that we work on, which does that. And I was just like talking about samples on how to get started, what they can do, how they can use it in their product, and things like that. And it was a lot of fun. Some very like interesting questions and interactions with the community.
Do you have like a link to the video? Is it on YouTube or LinkedIn?
It is. I'll send you a link.
So I actually wanted to ask, do you do more like product management, or do you actually write code? And if you write code, what stack do you use?
Yeah, no, I'm like software engineer, so I do more of the coding part of it. I'm not as much into the product management part of it. And it's more on the backend server part of it that I work on specifically. So my main language of interaction is C#. That's the main stuff that we build our project on. A lot of the science and computer vision algorithms that we work on are in C++. I personally don't work on that, but like some amount of familiarity with that. So a lot of the stuff we do is productizing the computer vision algorithms and making them available, making these holograms available in the cloud. So we work a lot with like databases and distributed systems and things like that. So a lot of Azure technologies. Azure is Microsoft's private cloud offering. So it's a lot of distributed systems, cloud technology, and C# development.
Did you always join this team, or was some other team?
No, I was telling Atit the other day, the first team I actually joined was completely different. I joined the Office 365 team, and I was working on Exchange. So I was working on email. And it was very interesting because that gave me a good view of what it is like to work on, because Outlook and Exchange is something that's used like crazy in the industry. Like I'm sure you all can attest to the fact that like most companies use Outlook and most companies use Exchange. So the scale and magnitude of that product is amazing. So that gave me a really good insight into what it is like to work on a system at scale. And then I moved to this team where it was about we don't have a product yet, but we want to build a product which eventually gets to that scale. So I kind of got to apply a lot of the things that I learned on my first team to know that these are things we don't want to do, or these are things that we do want to do, and kind of help build a product from scratch, like a V1 version. So it's both been very different experiences, but a lot of the skills I learned there are very applicable here.
And what made you like decide on switching teams?
I think it was about a year and 2 months in, where I was like, okay, I think I'm kind of plateauing out in how much I think I'm learning here. And I don't find myself being as excited about it as I would like. And also like the product that I was working on was it was more about making sure it stays stable and scales as opposed to innovating and doing something which doesn't exist yet. And I think I was like really missing that. And that's something I wanted to try. So when I heard that this team had positions open, I was like, I have no idea about this field. I think I'll be completely in over my head here. Like, let's go see what it's about. And that's what made me apply to like switch teams and try this rollout, was because I have no idea about the computer vision space, and it just seemed like a very interesting field with a lot of growth opportunities, because I'd be totally pushed out of my comfort zone. It was like, let's try that thing. I think sometimes as engineers, something that we don't do a lot is that we're so heads down in coding all the time that we forget to think about the end product and what we're actually building. But I think like that definitely helped me there, where I was like able to think of customer scenarios and think of like situations where I think this would be useful. I think I had the right questions when I was joining the team about, understanding the space and the applications of this technology, which definitely helped me.
I was looking at the device. Actually, I'm on the HoloLens page. So how heavy is it, and like, how does it work? Like, do you have to install apps and things like that? Is it similar to Oculus?
It's similar to Oculus, except it doesn't have to be connected to your computer. It doesn't have to have like a wired connection. Actually, I don't know if one of the Oculus doesn't, but I forget.
Different versions of Oculus. The latest one, it's all powered. You don't need to connect it to any power supply. So it's all
Yeah. So the V1 version of the HoloLens was extremely heavy, right? Like you would wear it for 30 minutes and you'd be like, I'm getting a headache. I can't wear it anymore. Whereas the new version, which came out last year, it's actually like they made it like the ergonomics is something they paid a lot of attention to because they got all that feedback in the first product, and you can comfortably wear it for at least an hour and a half, and you don't feel it like it's that heavy, because in the first version of the product, like all the weight was focused in the front of the headset, whereas now they've distributed it across the head and there's more weight on the back, so it's more comfortable. It's like, I would say you could do a full hour-long meeting and forget that you're wearing something on your head. Like, it's a much, much smoother experience now. And there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of the field of view and things like that. But in general, it's pretty comfortable on your head.
What are the major use cases like for HoloLens right now?
So right now, like I said, the main focus is enterprise. So there's a bunch of applications in the fields of construction and architecture. And something that's being used a lot is like on factory floors to help first line workers be able to basically move away from the clipboard and move to more like contextual data access and be able to map the entire space using the device. So, kind of like, oh, this device is malfunctioning and this is how you navigate to it. And it kind of shows you the map. And then things like remote assist, where you are looking at a machine and someone remotely is able to tell you like what part of it you need to fix. And kind of you can overlay a 3D picture and be like, oh, this is what I need to do. This is that part. So there's a lot of applications in construction, manufacturing, and architecture. Then another big one is education and kind of being able, a lot in like medical education specifically. Another, what else is there? There's like general medical field as well. I think they recently had the first surgery which was done where the surgeon was wearing a HoloLens device to be able to picture what they need to do and something like that, which was pretty cool. It's more enterprise now. And then I think slowly there's also a bunch of gaming that's coming into it. So something that my team worked on last year was there was a Minecraft Earth release that happened last year, which was where it was kind of Minecraft in the style of Pokemon, where you can go around and, mine things in the real world. So AR gaming is also like location-based entertainment, which I think Atit might have more experience with, like AR gaming. We've had a few projects with some arts and museums kind of places where you want to have interactive exhibits where your people who are coming to the exhibit are actually able to interact with paintings and architectures and sculptures and things like that and get more information based on which part of the exhibit they're interacting with. That's been fun too.
Yeah, I mean, one of the projects that was going on last semester at my program at ETC, Entertainment Technology Center, was AR theater. So like everyone in the theater would be wearing HoloLens, and there would be one character which would only be virtual. And like it was a prototype. Obviously, they had like 16 weeks to do it. But the story that they were telling was Tinkerbell.
Yeah.
The fairy was the virtual character, and it looked pretty neat. So
yeah.
So speaking of theaters, you do improv.
I try. Is it any good? Well, I don't know, but I keep going back. I do. It's been so much fun. Honestly, it's very, very different than anything I've done ever, tech related. And I think that's the first thing that drew me to it was I've never done theater or drama, but comedy is something I've always been interested in, and I don't think I could do stand-up. So I was like, let's see this improv comedy. I don't know how many of y'all have like watched Whose Line Is It Anyway growing up, but I used to be obsessed with that show. And I was like, this is so funny. How do they come up with these things? They're so funny. And when I first moved to Seattle, I was like, I went and saw an improv show and I was like, this is hilarious. This is so good. And I think I saw a few shows and they had a sign at the end saying, we also offer classes. And initially I was terrified. I was like, why would I do this? This is terrifying. But then I realized that I won't know anyone there. So let's go try it. And if I fail, like, it's fine. No one ever has to know about it. But I went there and I just had so much fun. And I was learning so much that I was like, okay, I'm going to go back. And then I just kept going back. And now it's 2.5 years later, and I'm still enjoying it. So it kind of started on a there's no way I'd be able to do this kind of attitude, and now I'm like it brings me so much joy, and it's just a lot of fun to do.
To me, you sound like marvelous Mrs. Maisel here.
Oh man, no, she's another level. I don't have half the difficulties that she faces.
But every time I hear improv and like I can picturize her and wow, like that sounds fun and that looks so much fun.
A lot of people are like improv is a cult, and people who are into it are very really into it. But for me, honestly, it's more about the people I've met through it have been amazing, but also it's like really pushed me out of my comfort zone to do something I never would, which is what I enjoy the most about it. And I've learned a lot of different skills which have been applicable in like day-to-day life, which I don't think I would have learned otherwise.
Can you elaborate on that? Even at work, they keep on having this improv for business classes and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So do you think that works, and how does that work?
I think it's something that requires a long-term investment. Like 1 or 2 classes are not going to make as much of a difference, but it's something like you actively keep going back and doing, then it's kind of, I can give you an example of like why I think so. First, when I started doing it, I was just doing it because it's fun. I was like, this is 2.5 hours in the week where I'm just going and laughing and like not thinking too much about what I'm saying. So it's like a 2.5 hours of happy time. Let's just do it. And then I kept doing it. I was like, okay, maybe there's something more. So I started doing some open mic nights. And the first few open mic nights were rough. Like I was so bad. I bombed really badly. Like me and my scene partner, I remember this was the second or the third time we did it. You get roughly 4 minutes during the open mic night. And we went on stage and we were trash. We were so bad. It was, that feeling where you could tell that the audience was cringing. They were like, get these people off the stage. Like we were spiraling. It was really, really bad. And I got off stage, and at the end of it, like, the world didn't end. I bombed in front of 100 people and it was fine. Like life went on. No one thought about it again. And that made me realize, like, how we're always thinking, what is this person going to say? Oh no, I messed up. They're going to think about it. And it kind of gave me that realization that it doesn't matter. Like, just go out and try your best, and that's what's important. And then the next time I went back, and it went great. And it was that realization of like, unless you try taking that risk and you fail, you're not going to realize, it's fine. It's okay. You can mess up, but like the world won't end. Just come back and try again. And I don't think that's something I would have done otherwise at that scale. Like in front, like the public speaking part of it was like, wow, I'm alive. No one threw rocks at me. That's excellent. And that was a very like aha moment for me. Ki not everyone's always worried about you messing up. Like it's in your head. It's fine if you mess up. So that was pretty cool.
How do you turn that knob off? Like when you're on stage, and because before you tell a joke,
Mm-hmm.
I can picture like you will be thinking in the back of your mind, is it funny? Am I going to be funny? But improv is so quick. You have to be really quick. So how do you turn that knob off?
Before you start thinking about is this funny or not, you just say it. So it's kind of because in day-to-day life, we're like, oh, should I say this? Should I not say this? And you kind of overthink it in your head. Whereas when you're doing this, it's more of like, try not to think about it too much. If it feels right, just say it. And also, like the whole thing in improv is that the people on stage with you are supporting you, and you develop this environment of trust that even if I say something really stupid, they're going to take that as an offer and build on that. And they're kind of going to nothing that you say is wrong because it's a made up world anyway. So you stop thinking that things you say are wrong. Like mistakes are also offers which add to the scene and which are making something in the scene. Like if you're doing a scene on stage and you hear like a thud sound in the background at the other end of the theater, you incorporate that into the scene and be like, oh, look at that, someone's knocking on the door, and nothing that happens is wrong. So then you have that fearless key, oh no, is this going to be funny? Sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's just a thing you're saying in the scene and adding to that. So you try not to overthink it. Is like it's a gradual thing that happens.
And have you ever tried that Michael Scott thing where you say that I have a gun in my pocket and you just go around? Have you done that?
One of the first things our teachers taught us is that's not how you hold a gun. Don't do the gun scene, which Michael Scott did. Because everyone who gets into improv is like, oh, I'm going to do this scene like Michael Scott. And they're like, we've seen this so many times. Please don't do it. So, but I have tried it. Yes, I have disobeyed.
You have that.
Oh, definitely, yes. Everyone has to do a gun scene at some point. It's like a rite of passage. Yeah, it's fun. You also it's cool because like that's the one time where I interact with people outside of tech the most. Like some people, some of my friends through improv, they're like high school teachers or they own a flower shop, game designers. So it's like I get to meet a lot of people which otherwise I don't know if I'd have gotten the exposure to. So that's also been a very fun part of the experience for me. I'm still like I'm not like good enough to be a part of any company, so it's more of indie stuff. But like my favorite improv thing to do is actually me plus two more of my friends. There's very few Indian improvisers in the Seattle community. So the three of us together, we formed, like, we kind of spotted each other. We're like, oh, you're an Indian person in improv. Like, let's do something together. And we made this group called Let's Chat, which is, it's kind of a pun on chatting and like chat and chatting. So our thing is that we get a suggestion from the audience, which is a very like everyday thing for someone in America, like, Thanksgiving or pancakes or something. And then we kind of give some stories about our experience with that and how like this is not something that we really had growing up. And we use those stories to inspire us to like play different games and do different improv scenes. So every time we do it, it's completely different, and like the main thing is it's like inspired by our experience moving from India to the US and the differences in life here and there.
Wow, that's really interesting.
It is. I highly recommend it to anyone who's trying to like step out of the comfort zone and get better with overthinking and spontaneity and things like that.
So do you have any other side projects that you're working on? Any near future plans?
Something I work on a bunch is like with Microsoft and a little bit outside too is I help with panels and workshops for underprivileged girls in tech and just like exposing them to tech in middle school and high school. So something we've been working on is trying to get like have a huge conference for them to come and learn some coding skills and interact with some people at Microsoft and things like that. So that's something I work on a bunch. This is a little different. It's called Ignite, which is like inspiring girls now in technology everywhere. It's more of a Seattle thing, but it's the same concept of people who don't have access to education where they can do computer science and things like that, like just exposing them to showing them that there are also women in this field and that this is something that they can pursue and kind of giving them some basic skills to get started with that. So I've been doing a bunch of like teaching at those workshops, hosting panels, and we're trying to have a big conference for that. So that's something I enjoy doing. And it's cool because Microsoft, like any time that I put into that, Microsoft matches and they're super supportive of it, which is always nice. So that's something I work on a bunch in my free time.
Newton said, "If I have seen the future, it is by standing on shoulders of the giants." We bring to you these giants in the life of our guests. Our next segment is Top 3, a curated list of top 3 recommendations from our guests.
What are your top 3 book recommendations, and what is the book that you've gifted the most?
My top 3 books, the last book that I read, which I really liked, was Trevor Noah's Born a Crime. I don't know if you all have read that yet, but I thought it was so well written and it was very, very interesting to read. And it was to see how, using his wit and ability, he was able to, fit into different groups and how that's helped him through his life and just the whole keep hustling, don't give up. So Born a Crime is like something I really enjoyed. Another book I really like is something I actually started reading as a suggestion from an improv teacher. It's called Impro. It's by Keith Johnstone. It's a pretty old book, but I think a lot of the concepts they talk about there are very interesting and applicable in real life. Like, for example, there's a whole chapter on spontaneity and, how that's important in life. And then there's a whole chapter about the general status dynamic. So it talks a little bit about how in any situation, there's always someone who has a higher status and lower status and how that keeps like flipping. And just observing that has been super interesting. So Impro has been a very interesting book. I don't know if this is interesting to you all, but the book I've gifted the most, it's like fantasy fiction, but it's called Name of the Wind. It's by this author called Patrick Rothfuss. And I like this book a lot because I feel like I generally like reading fantasy fiction books because it takes me out of the real world. Like, I feel like there's always so much happening and there's so many things to stress about and the world is constantly burning. So it's nice for some time to read a book which puts you in another universe and, for at least some amount of time you're completely there. So it's called Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. And I think there's 2 books. He's currently writing the 3rd one, but I highly recommend that for anyone who likes fantasy fiction.
3 movies or TV show recommendations.
I watch way more TV and movie shows than I should. Have you all watched Schitt's Creek? That's my usual like go-to binge kind of. The way we used to watch Friends in the past, that's how I watch Schitt's Creek now. I just, keep watching episodes. Recently, I've been hooked onto BoJack Horseman a lot. I think that's pretty funny. Have you all watched Killing Eve? That's also a very good TV show. It's like mystery, drama, murder, comedy, everything. That's been fun. And then in movies, I'm trying to remember. Oh, one of my favorite movies in the past few years has been The Big Sick. Have you all watched that one yet?
Yeah, I love it.
I love that movie. I think that, oh my God, that guy's sense of humor is really, really good. And also, I mean, it's not exactly, but I find it's interesting. I draw some parallels in that where he's, a brown person telling his parents about his white partner. And when I was watching it, I was like, oh my, I can see a lot of similarities between that and my real life. So I think I found it even funnier because of that. And what else? I love Bollywood. So like Ye Jawani Hai Diwani is one of my all-time, like I think I've watched that movie like 50 times. Knives Out, that's a movie which came out, I think sometime last year. I thought that was pretty interesting.
Is there any podcast and YouTube channel recommendations that you have?
Yes, a few. One of my favorite podcasts that I like listening to is this podcast called The Moth. And what they do is they do storytelling. So the thing is they do storytelling and all the stories are based on like true experiences that people have. And the stories range between 3 minutes to 15 minutes. And it's very interesting because a lot of the stories that people tell are very simple, everyday things, but they talk about it from their point of view. And you start noticing things in day-to-day life which you wouldn't otherwise, because you're like, oh, that's an interesting story that I could tell. And just kind of makes you think. The whole idea is you don't need to make up stories. You have a lot of stories in you already. It's just a question of you wanting to tell them. And this podcast is super good about like encouraging people to do storytelling. So The Moth is awesome. Another one I really like is Reply All. It's kind of this one where there's these hosts who talk about different tech issues that people might have, and they kind of they kind of do like investigative journalism with tech stuff. And it's usually pretty funny and eye-opening, and the conversations they have around these things are very interesting. Like there was this one episode where this guy got, you know how you get all these calls saying, you have not paid your tax, and if you don't pay it by this amount of time, then you will be kicked out of the country, and all those like scam calls. So what this guy does is he actually like tracks down who made the call, and he actually he keeps tracking it down, and he eventually tracks it down to a call center in Delhi, and he goes there and finds out that they actually have this huge ring operation where they specifically target all of these particular kind of students and trick them into paying money, and he like brings them down and stuff. So it's very interesting, like just based on his curiosity, he tracks down these big things. And another one that I like, I'm guessing some of you might have heard about Serial, the murder one.
That's how I started listening to podcasts.
Yeah, same. I remember once I was flying back from the US to India, and I downloaded episodes of Serial, and for like the entire 9 hours, I listened to a whole season. And I got out of the plane and I looked like I'd been traumatized. My mom said, what happened on that plane journey?
Unlike the name, we are dwelling deep into our guests' thought process. Rapid Fire is our next segment where our guests will answer some quirky, some weird, but mostly fun questions.
If you could invite 3 people for dinner and have a chat, they could be living or dead, who would that be and why?
Oh, too many people. Hasan Minhaj, don't mind that I use the word woke, but I think he's very woke. I like him. Ranbir Kapoor, because I haven't seen him in a while and I don't know what he's up to, and I'm seeing him on screen. And Michelle Obama could be interesting.
Moving on to the next question. If you could create a holiday, what would it be and what would it celebrate? You can go as crazy as you want.
I'd want something which is like pajama day, where everyone has to stay at home and stay in their pajamas and like just relax all day and no questions asked, like just chill the fuck out. And there's like everything on that day is kind of built around that. Like the best movies will stream, the best TV shows, like stores will sell stuff which will, make your relaxation prime. And oh man, that would be amazing.
If you could use Veritaserum on someone, who would you use it on and why?
I mean, honestly, knowing me, it would probably be some celebrity in order to get some gossip, which I have questions about. Salman Khan, I wanted to own up to all the things he did to Aishwarya Rai.
Okay. Interesting.
I have not forgotten.
Maybe ask him if he was driving.
Actually, honestly though, it would probably be someone who's, someone in a high position, and ask them about how often, if they do like feel the imposter syndrome, like do they honestly feel like they are the most confident person and like they are amazing at what they do, and just, kind of really understand if they, like all of us do they also have self-doubt, like someone like Obama, or I'm not even going to say Trump, but someone interesting like that. Just, what is the image you have of yourself in your head, and understand that.
If you could have a gigantic billboard anywhere with anything on it, what would it say and why?
Nobody knows what they're doing. Like everyone's just figuring it out and just calling that out. Yeah, just like a big thing reminding people that everyone's figuring it out.
Our next segment is called Not the Onion, presenting 4 news articles that are mind-blowingly ridiculous that they could have been written by The Onion, a satirical news company. However, one is a fake article created by us. You have to guess which one is not The Onion.
So the first one, anti-porn filters stop Dominic Cummings trending on Twitter. Twitter's anti-porn filters have blocked Dominic Cummings' name from its list of trending topics, despite Boris Johnson's chief advisor dominating British political news for almost a week. As a result of the filtering, trending topics over the past 5 days have instead included a variety of misspellings of his name, including Cummings, Dominic Cummings, Sack Cummings. Bizarrely, the shortened hashtag Cumgate has also trended, since the first syllable is not included in Twitter's filter list. Second, California homeless man breaks into bank to microwave Hot Pockets. It was worth it. A homeless man in California has been accused of breaking into a bank early Wednesday morning just to use it to microwave his Hot Pockets, according to reports. Police responded to Wells Fargo around 3:30 a.m. after an alarm was sounded. The alarm company told officers that the man could be seen on a surveillance video in the break room using microwave. Was it worth it? Yeah, it was worth it, said the man. St. Paul police screened Zootopia as part of anti-bias training. More than 800 employees of the St. Paul Police Home Department recently went through their annual equity training. This year, they turned to an animated movie from Hollywood to talk about some serious issues they face every day. Zootopia, which was released last year, won an Oscar for its handling of subjects like prejudice and bias. Now, the animated metaphor for race relations could help police in the real world and see the same issues in new light. And the fourth article, Denver restaurant puts hand sanitizer, face masks, and hand gloves on the menu. Over the holiday weekend, as governor set a restaurant reopening date of May 27th in Colorado, one restaurant in Denver came up with an interesting idea. They have included a pump of hand sanitizer, face mask, and hand gloves on the menu. The restaurant owner said on Friday, 50% of our restaurant team has been working throughout the pandemic on post-coronavirus reopening for the restaurant, designing a new table layout for guests, indoor versus outdoor seating area, switching from air conditioning to a more natural airflow. And one of the ideas that came up was selling some of the essential preventative items in the restaurant. This felt like a good business opportunity. So those were the 4 news articles. Anti-porn filters on Twitter. Second one being California homeless man breaking into a bank. Third being Zootopia being screened for anti-bias training. And fourth one being the Denver restaurant. So Archana, starting with you, which one do you think is the fake one?
Dude, all of them seem legit. 1 and 4. I think anti-porn is not true. Twitter's had a lot going on. I don't know. Yeah, I'm gonna go with 1.
Okay. Anti-porn filters. Heloni, which one do you think is a fake one?
The Zootopia one. I think Zootopia. Yeah, that's my pick.
Zootopia, third one. Okay, and then Atit.
Yeah, I'll also go with the first one.
Anti-porn. Okay. The fake one was the Denver restaurant.
So I think this was a very funny, insightful, and hilarious show today. Thank you so much for being part of it, Archana. So that's about it, folks. We will be back next week with another guest and another story. We would love to hear your thoughts about the episode. Feel free to reach out to us on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook. You can just search What the Hat Podcast. Also, subscribe to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Castbox, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcast from, so you never miss out on the next episode. This is Hiloni, Atit, and Tapan signing off, and this was What the Hat.